Okay, Layer's Law number 5 relates to one of the communication conventions in sociology, and that is you shouldn't or don't use contractions. And by contractions, we mean don't, shouldn't, wouldn't, didn't, those kinds of things. And instead, you want to use the full words. So did not, would not, could not, etc. In sociology and in most sociological journals, one of their requirements is that you write in a very formal way. And one manifestation of that is that you don't use contractions. Now, you can definitely use contractions in more informal forms of writing. So for our class on exams, they're perfectly fine there. But for formal academic papers in sociology, the expectation is that you do not use them. And there are some journals where if you have contractions in your paper and you send it to them, they'll bounce it right back to you and say you need to clean this up before they'll even look at it in terms of its substance. And so, again, one of our charges as a major at Gettysburg is to teach students the communication conventions of the discipline. So that is why we have this particular Layer's Law. And I will look for contractions to make sure they're not there. One thing that it wouldn't hurt to do is when you're kind of doing like the final edits of your paper, you can Control F and look for these single apostrophes just to make sure that at 12:30 at night a contraction didn't happen to slip in. Now, the one exception to this is if you are directly quoting someone and they use a contraction, then keep it in there, and that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable because you're trying to represent their words accurately. But for things that you write, there shouldn't be contractions. For things like the Meat Racket or other works that we've read, if there's a contraction there, then it is appropriate to keep that contraction in its form when you do direct quotations. Speaking of quotations, this relates to Layer's Law number 6, which is where you want to support your argument with quotations. And the reason why you want to do this is that this helps demonstrate to the reader that you're providing an accurate representation of the material you're covering, that you haven't gone rogue, or that you don't understand a particular concept that you're using. And in some ways, these quotations are actually quite a blessing because the authors we've read so far have done a lot of work to define a concept or to paint a picture of what inequality is looking like in the chicken industry. And we should profit from the work that they've already done. And we do that by using their quotations. They've done some of the work, so let's take advantage of that. And just to give you a sense of the level of support that I'm looking for, on average, you want in general, you want to average 2 to 3 quotations per body paragraph. So not in the intro, not in the conclusion, but in the sections, the body sections of your paper, on average, 2 to 3 quotations per paragraph. And if you do this, that in general, that means you're supporting your points enough. And this encourages you to use other works to help buttress the points that you're trying to make. So if you're going to use the concept of, say, super exploitation and the way that Singh defines it, Singh's already defined this concept, and she's already elaborated what she means by it. You are just utilizing it. So you don't have to come up with this concept. You can just cite her and quote her to show what this idea means. Then you'll want to explain it to the reader to show that you actually understand it. But then you can then apply it to what we see in the Meat Racket. And in the meat racket, Leonard has given us a lot of really helpful information about what's going on in the poultry industry, and we should benefit from it by quoting it. So, for example, if you're talking about the tournament, you can quote what he says about the tournament, right, to reinforce the points that you are trying to make. So, again, as a general rule for your body paragraphs, 2 to 3 quotation per body paragraph. And as you'll see for the outline that you'll be turning in, part of that will entail you going through and getting quotations that you think are going to be relevant to particular body paragraphs that you're going to write about in your paper. All right, the final layers law is that when you are citing materials, you want to use the citation format that comes from the American Sociological Association. They're our main professional body, and they set the citation format that is followed in at least many sociological journals. And when it comes to in-text citations, the ASA format generally has 3 parts. You have the author's last name, or if there's more authors, you have their last names. You have the year that the work was published. And then if you are quoting something or citing something very specific from the work, you will give the page number that corresponds to that quotation or corresponds to the point that is being made, the specific point being made, and where it could be found in the book. And the idea behind offering the page number is if someone has any questions about a quotation or wants to read the fuller context or just wants to investigate that issue more, they know exactly where to look then. So if you have talked about, say, how Tyson is able to increase the price of chicken over time, and that's found on, that point is made on page 224. If you cite that, then if someone is interested, they could go and read more about that topic and know where to look in the book to find out more about that particular topic. All right, and the way that this works, in general, the way it's set up is you have the author's last name, then you just have a space, there's no comma, you have the year of publication, colon, page number. And I'll give examples of what that looks like here. In many cases, citations go at the end of a sentence. So an example would be, a self-fulfilling prophecy is defined as, then you give the quote, and then here's the citation, and the citations always come in parentheses. See that parenthesis, author's last name is Merton, just a space, no comma, the year of publication, which is 1948, colon, space, and then page number, where the reader could go and find this quotation that you're using from Merton. Another example would be, others have identified the color line as being the defining feature of the 20th century. This is a point that's made by Du Bois. And so the in-text citation would look like parentheses, Du Bois, author's last name, space, 2015, colon, space, page 167. Now, if it happens that you mention the author's last name, and I should say this, the convention in sociology is that when you're referring to people, to scholarly works, refer to the author's last name, not their first name. So in talking about the meat racket, you would refer to Leonard, not Christopher. all right? Or Goffman in this case, you'd refer to Goffman, which is his last name, not Irving, his first name. So if you use an author's last name in your sentence, then you can put the citation right after it. And the way that it would be structured would be Goffman defines deference as, and so this is the point you're trying to make. And then right after Goffman, the last name, you'd have parentheses, and then you'd have the year of publication, colon, space, page number, close parentheses. And the reason why this is it's just a little bit more efficient as a form of writing than doing full citations at the end of the sentence if someone's last name has already been invoked in a sentence. Now, there are a couple of exceptions when you don't need to include a page number. And one is if you're referring to the work in general, or kind of like the main point that it's trying to make, or kind of offering a global perspective on a work. So an example would be Butler's, and since I'm the author's last name is coming up in the sentence, then the citation would go right after. And here would just be year of publication, which is 1990. So Butler's Gender Troubles invites us to rethink traditional understanding of gender in some profound ways. This is a very general or global statement about this book, Gender Trouble. I'm not referencing a specific point that Butler made on, say, page 23. So you can cite this, the work in general. For many of you, you will talk about the meat racket, or kind of introduce the meat racket in your introduction. More often than not, in that case, you would just be citing the year of publication. So it'd be Leonard, parentheses, 2014, close parentheses, because you're not bringing up a specific topic. You're just referring to the book in general. And the other exception, if there happens to be a work that does not have page numbers to it, then you would just cite author's last name and year of publication. Even if you are directly quoting from this work, because there are no page numbers associated with it. This can often happen if you're citing things like web pages and some other sources that don't have page numbers. But if a work does have page numbers and you are citing something specific, make sure to give that page number. So then you are fulfilling the communication convention of sociology. All right, that's it for Lair's laws. We'll probably quickly go over these in class, and then the rest of the time we can either work collectively or individually on paper or different sections of it. All right, I'll see you on Thursday.